Welcome to the dark side of the human experience. When we think of a haunted house, we usually imagine things that are easy to explain away. A cold draft coming from a poorly sealed window. A floorboard creaking under the shifting weight of an old foundation. We watch movies where ghosts are translucent figures drifting through walls, sad and harmless. But there is a different kind of haunting, a kind that does not hide in the shadows, a kind that does not just want to be seen, it wants to be felt. Paranormal investigators call them Poltergeists, a German word that translates to noisy ghost. But noise is just the beginning. These entities are not residual echoes of the past. They are conscious, they are angry, and they possess the terrifying ability to interact with our physical world. They can touch you, they can push you, and if you do not leave, they will hurt you. Tonight, we are looking at one of the most violent documented cases of a physical haunting in modern American history. A case where the entity did not just haunt a house, it went to war with the family living inside it. This is Chapter 1, The Displacement. In the late fall of 2018, a family of 4, the Millers, moved into a beautiful, flotorial colonial home in a quiet suburb of Pennsylvania. David, the father, was a structural engineer. He was a man of science and logic. His wife, Sarah, was a schoolteacher. They had a 10-year-old son named Leo and a 7-year-old daughter named Mia. They also had a large German shepherd named Buster. The house was built in the 1970s. It had no dark history, no murders, no tragic accidents. It was just a normal house on a normal street. For the first 3 weeks, life was perfect. The kids loved their new rooms, and David spent his evenings working in his downstairs study. The first sign that something was wrong did not come from a ghost. It came from the dog. Buster was a trained, fearless guard dog. But exactly 22 days after they moved in, his behavior drastically changed. He refused to go up to the second floor. If David tried to call him up the wooden stairs, Buster would sit at the very bottom step, the hair on his back standing straight up, and let out a low, continuous growl, staring directly at the empty landing above. No amount of coaxing or treat could get him to take a single step upward. David assumed the dog was just having trouble adjusting to the slippery hardwood floors. He dismissed it. Then the displacement began. It started with small, easily rationalized things. Sarah would leave her car keys on the kitchen counter by the sink. An hour later, she would find them in the center of the dining room table. David would leave his reading glasses on his nightstand, only to find them perfectly balanced on the edge of the bathroom sink. They blamed each other. They blamed the kids. It is human nature to find a logical explanation for the impossible. But then, the entity escalated its efforts. It wanted them to know that this was not a mistake. It was a Tuesday evening. The kids were at a neighbor's house, and David was still at work. Sarah was home alone, preparing dinner. She opened the heavy wooden door of the pantry to get a bag of rice. She left the door wide open and turned her back to chop vegetables at the kitchen island. The kitchen was completely silent. Suddenly, right behind her, the heavy pantry door slammed shut with the force of a physical blow. Bang! The sound was so loud it rattled the plates in the cabinets. Sarah jumped, dropping her knife. There were no windows open. There was no wind. The door was incredibly heavy. It could not close on its own. She slowly walked over to the pantry and reached for the brass doorknob. The moment her fingers brushed the cold metal, she felt something impossible. The doorknob was vibrating. It was a fast, aggressive vibration, as if someone on the other side of the door was gripping the handle tightly and shaking it. Sarah stepped back, her heart hammering in her chest. She called out, "David, is someone in there?" The vibration stopped instantly. Sarah grabbed a heavy flashlight from the drawer and threw the pantry door open. It was empty. Just cans of soup and boxes of cereal. When David came home, he inspected the hinges. He used a level to check the floor. He found nothing wrong. He told Sarah it must have been a sudden change in air pressure. But that night, at 3 in the morning, the science and logic of David Miller were completely shattered. David woke up to the sound of footsteps. They were not the soft, hesitant footsteps of a child going to the bathroom. They were the heavy, deliberate impacts of a large man wearing hard-soled boots. Stomp, stomp, stomp. The sound was coming from the downstairs living room, directly beneath their bedroom. David immediately thought of a home invasion. He quietly got out of bed, grabbed the heavy wooden baseball bat he kept in the closet, and crept out into the dark hallway. He could hear the footsteps pacing back and forth across the living room floor. He carefully walked down the stairs, gripping the bat tightly. When he reached the bottom step, he reached around the corner and flicked on the living room lights. Jumping into the doorway with his weapon raised. The living room was completely empty. The front door was deadbolted from the inside. The windows were locked. David stood in the center of the room, confused and terrified. He looked down at the carpet. The carpet was thick and plush, and right in the center of the room, David saw a trail of fresh, deep indentations in the fabric. The distinct shape of heavy boot prints forming a circle. As he stared at the impossible footprints, the temperature in the room plummeted. David could see his own breath misting in the air. And then, right next to his right ear, a deep, raspy voice whispered a single word. This is Chapter 2, The Escalation. After that night, the entity stopped hiding. The psychological torment shifted into a violent, physical assault on the family. The most terrifying aspect of a poltergeist is its unpredictability. It does not follow the rules of night and day. It does not stay in one room. It invades every aspect of your life. The children became the primary targets. One afternoon, 10-year-old Leo was sitting at his desk in his bedroom doing his math homework. His door was open. Suddenly, his desk chair was violently yanked backward, pulling him away from the desk. Leo fell to the floor, terrified. He looked up, expecting to see his sister playing a prank. The room was empty. Before he could stand up, his heavy wooden dresser, which weighed over 100 pounds, slowly began to slide across the floor toward the door, completely blocking his exit. Leo began to scream. Downstairs, Sarah heard the terrified screams of her son. She ran up the stairs and slammed her shoulder against Leo's bedroom door, but it would not budge. The heavy dresser was holding it shut. Through the solid wood, Sarah could hear a chaotic symphony of destruction. Books were being thrown against the walls. Glass was shattering. And underneath it all, a low, guttural, laughing sound that did not belong to her son. Sarah pushed with all her strength, screaming for Leo to climb out the window. Suddenly, the resistance on the other side of the door vanished. Sarah fell forward into the room. The room looked like a bomb had gone off. Every single book, toy, and piece of clothing had been violently thrown into the center of the floor. The posters were ripped from the walls. Leo was huddled in the corner, sobbing, his arms covering his head. But the most disturbing detail was not the mess. It was the walls. Written on the yellow wallpaper in what looked like thick black charcoal were 3 massive, jagged lines. They looked like the claw marks of a massive animal dragging from the ceiling all the way down to the baseboards. Sarah grabbed her son and ran out of the house. She refused to go back inside until David came home from work. When David arrived, he saw the destruction. The structural engineer who relied on facts and physics was finally broken. He realized that no amount of logic could protect his family from an invisible enemy. That night, David decided to set up a digital audio recorder on the kitchen counter, hoping to capture some evidence of what they were dealing with. He locked the doors, turned off the lights, and took his family to a motel for the night. The next morning, David returned to the house alone. The house was perfectly quiet. He went to the kitchen and checked the audio recorder. It had been running for 8 hours. He plugged his headphones in and began to listen. For the first 4 hours, there was nothing but the hum of the refrigerator. But at exactly 3:33 in the morning, the audio changed. First, there was a sound of dragging, something heavy being pulled across the kitchen floor. Then, the sound of all the kitchen cabinet doors being opened at the exact same time. And then, clear as day, captured on the digital microphone, was a conversation. It was not one voice. It was 3 distinct voices, Two of them were deep, distorted, and inhuman. The third voice was high-pitched and frightened. The high voice said, "Why are we hurting them?" One of the deep voices responded immediately, its tone dripping with malice. "Because it is fun, and they cannot see us." David unplugged the recorder, his hands shaking violently. He knew then that they were not dealing with a residual spirit. They were dealing with a group of intelligent, malicious entities that were treating his family like a game. And the game was about to become deadly. Welcome back to the darkest corners of the Miller family home. We have seen how a haunting begins. The displacement of objects, the strange noises in the dark, the psychological warfare designed to break the mind before breaking the body. But a true poltergeist does not stop at fear. It feeds on it. And once it has consumed enough energy from the terrified family, it gains the power to manifest physically. The audio recording in the kitchen was the turning point for David Miller. The man of science had finally accepted that his family was under attack by an unseen, malicious force. But acceptance is not protection. This is Chapter 3, The Attack. It was mid-December. The snow was falling heavily, blanketing the suburban streets in an eerie, quiet white. The Miller family had tried to leave, but financial constraints and the legalities of their mortgage made it impossible to simply abandon the property. They were trapped. They decided to sleep in the living room together, pulling their mattresses onto the floor, hoping there was safety in numbers. They left all the lights on, but entities of this nature are not deterred by light or numbers. They are emboldened by the challenge. At 2:15 in the morning, the heavy chandelier hanging above the dining room table, just 10 feet away from where the family slept, began to swing. It started slowly, a gentle sway, back and forth, as if a breeze had caught it. But the windows were sealed shut. David woke up to the sound of the crystal prisms clinking together. He sat up on his mattress, staring in horror as the chandelier swung faster and higher. The heavy brass chain groaning under the violent, unnatural momentum. Sarah woke up next, pulling her children close, covering their eyes. Suddenly, the chandelier violently wrenched itself to a complete stop in mid-air, defying the laws of physics. It hung frozen at a 45-degree angle for 3 agonizing seconds. And then, with a sound of snapping metal, the heavy fixture detached from the ceiling and hurled itself directly across the room, smashing into the stone fireplace with explosive force. Shards of glass and jagged brass rained down onto the carpet, missing the family by inches. The living room light flickered and died. The house was plunged into total darkness. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, the physical assault began. David felt something cold and hard wrap around his left ankle. It felt like a pair of massive, freezing hands gripping him with impossible strength. Before he could even scream, he was violently yanked backward off his mattress and dragged across the dark, glass-strewn carpet toward the hallway. David clawed at the floorboards, shouting for Sarah to grab the kids and run. He felt the entity's grip tighten, the cold fingers digging into his skin, dragging him effortlessly into the pitch-black corridor leading to the basement stairs. Sarah scrambled in the dark, her hands finding the heavy iron fire poker near the hearth. She lunged into the hallway, swinging blindly into the darkness. Her weapon struck empty air, but the sudden, aggressive movement seemed to startle the unseen force. The grip on David's ankle vanished as quickly as it had appeared. David scrambled back to his family, his ankle bruised and bleeding. They huddled together in the center of the dark living room, listening to the heavy, mocking footsteps retreating down the basement stairs. The next morning, the Millers realized they were no longer dealing with a haunting. They were dealing with a hostage situation. They packed their bags and moved into a crowded two-bedroom apartment, refusing to step foot in the house again. But you cannot simply run away from an entity that has attached itself to your family. This is Chapter 4. The Exorcism. Desperate, David reached out to the local diocese, pleading for help. The church initially dismissed his claims, but after sending 2 investigators who witnessed a heavy oak chair levitate and smash into a wall, they authorized a formal intervention. They sent Father Thomas, an older, experienced priest who specialized in demonic oppression. Father Thomas knew immediately that this was not a simple spirit. The chaotic, violent nature of the activity, combined with the vile voices captured on the audio recorder, pointed directly to a demonic infestation. The Millers returned to the house with Father Thomas on a cold Tuesday afternoon. The air inside the house felt thick, heavy, and smelled faintly of sulfur and rotting meat. Father Thomas instructed the family to wait on the front porch. He entered the house alone, armed only with holy water, a crucifix, and a worn leather-bound book of rites. The entity did not wait for the prayers to begin. The moment Father Thomas stepped into the hallway, the temperature plummeted dramatically. The heavy front door slammed shut behind him, locking the family outside. From the porch, David and Sarah could hear the battle beginning. Through the thick walls, they heard Father Thomas's voice booming in Latin, reciting the rite of exorcism. His voice was steady, commanding, and powerful, but it was answered by a sound that chilled them to the bone. A chaotic, overlapping chorus of deep, guttural roars and high-pitched screams that shook the entire house. It sounded like a dozen wild animals trapped inside the walls, tearing the house apart. Windows shattered from the inside. The heavy thud of furniture being thrown echoed onto the street. The Millers stood frozen in terror as the battle raged. for over 3 hours. The chanting of Father Thomas grew hoarse, but it never stopped. The demonic roars grew more desperate, more violent, until finally a massive, deafening crash came from the second floor, followed by complete and utter silence. The front door slowly creaked open. Father Thomas stood in the doorway, physically exhausted, his face pale and covered in sweat. The cross in his hand was visibly bent. He looked at David and Sarah and simply said, "It is done. But you can never live here again. The house is scarred." The Millers sold the house to a development company at a massive loss. The building was eventually demolished, and the lot remains empty to this day. We try to make our homes safe. We install locks, alarms, and cameras. We try to keep the darkness out. But true darkness does not come from the street. It comes from the places we cannot see. It lives in the spaces between the walls. It feeds on the fear we try to hide. The next time you hear a strange sound in your house at night, the next time you find your keys moved, or feel a cold draft in a closed room, do not ignore it. Do not assume it is just the wind, because once you invite it in, it may never let you go. Thank you for surviving this 30-minute journey into the terrifying reality of violent hauntings. If you have ever experienced something unexplainable in your own home, leave a comment below. Your story might save someone else from making the same mistakes. If you made it to the very end of this mega documentary, make sure to subscribe to Deep Story, turn on the notification bell, and leave a like to support our deep dives into the unknown. Always check your locks, never answer voices in the dark, and I will see you in the next nightmare.